How's it going, guys? Today we're going to talk a little bit about compensation and taxation. So we talked a little bit earlier about, what kind of jobs are out there for you, what kind of interests you have, your aptitudes. Once you've gotten that job, now we need to look at our paycheck. How do we figure out how we're going to get paid? What kind of taxes are going to be coming out, and that sort of thing. Okay, so there's a couple different types of compensation that you can get. You can get paid by wage, which is probably what most of you who have jobs now have, where you'll get an hourly rate. So for part-time jobs, you work at Pick and Save, you work at a local restaurant, they're going to pay you probably $8 an hour, $7.50 an hour. You earn a wage. You clock in, you clock out, you get paid for when you were there. The next most common type used of compensation is salary. So you get a set amount, usually per year, sometimes per month, regardless of how much you work. So teachers get paid by a salary. I have a yearly salary that no matter how much time I spend on the weekends or after school, before school, I'm going to get paid the same amount. I don't clock in and clock out. And that's how most professional jobs are paid, by a salary. So it's a set amount per year. Some other ways that are not as popular but are still used. One is commission. If you have a family member who is maybe a car salesman or does some sort of sales for a living, most salespeople get paid by commission. So they receive a percentage of every sale that they make. So think of, your car salesman. Why are they so pushy to try to make sales all the time? Well, because their livelihood, how much money they make, depends on how much they sell or how good they are at their job. So if you're somebody who's very highly motivated and likes to work for larger sums of money, that might be something that you look at. If you know you're going to be a really good salesman or saleswoman, you could get paid by commission. You get a percentage of every sale that you make. The downside to that, well, what if people aren't buying cars? Well, then you're kind of out of luck a little bit because you're not going to be making as much money. And then the last type of compensation is piece rate, which is not very commonly used. What piece rate is it pays you by the number of units you produce or by how much work you do. So, for example, sometimes truck drivers are paid by the mile. That would be an example of piece rate. If you drive, for every mile you drive, you get a certain amount of money. That is actually discouraged by OSHA. Sorry about that. Mr. LeDuc just walked into the room. But as I was saying, that is actually discouraged by OSHA, which stands for Occupational Safety and Health Administration, because when you get paid by piece rate, sometimes people will try to do as much work as they can in as short amount of time as possible, and that can kind of be dangerous for people. So think of like a manufacturing job. If you're trying to make as many pieces as you can, you're not always going to be safe and follow all the guidelines. So that piece rate is not used very commonly. So now we're going to talk about some vocabulary that's associated with your paycheck. The first is gross pay. If you've looked at your paycheck recently, you've probably seen two numbers. One is gross pay and the next is net pay. Gross pay is the total amount of money that you earned before any taxes or deductions are taken out. So let's say that I got a job, that I got paid $10 an hour and worked 10 hours in the week. My gross pay would be $100, but that's before any taxes or deductions or anything else is taken out. So that would be called my gross pay. And so most people would like to get that amount because it's always larger than their net pay. And your net pay is what you actually take home or what you make. So after you've taken out taxes and other deductions, what you have left over that you get to take home is called your net pay. So the example that I always bring up is my net here. When we talk about net pay, imagine all the butterflies there. We've got our gross number of butterflies. Then we bring our net in, and what we're left over with at the end is our net pay or our net butterflies. So that's kind of my little example that I use. So gross pay, the large amount, the total amount that we earned before taxes. And then we take out our deductions and taxes. Now we've got net pay left over. So sometimes people will ask, well, does it really matter how I get paid? Yes, the answer is yes, it does, for a couple different reasons. One, let's say you get a job offer from two separate places that are the same type of job, but they get paid a little bit differently. Maybe in one job you get paid once a month, the other job you get paid every week. even though you're making the same amount of money, when you get that money and how much is in there is going to be a little bit different. Maybe one job is commission versus one is salary. Or the example that's on the screen here, let's say Jake makes $40,000 a year and gets paid once a month. Susan makes $40,000 and gets paid every 2 weeks. Well, they're going to end up a little bit different because Jake is going to get 12 paychecks, right? One for every month. And Susan is going to get 26 paychecks every year because there's 52 weeks in a year. We cut that in half. She'll get paid 26 times. It's going to be a little bit less than Jake each time, but they're going to end up being the same at the end. How they get there is a little bit different. So it does matter how you get paid. We'll look a little bit more about paychecks in the next video, but for now I want to talk a little bit more about taxes. So as consumers, as citizens, there's 3 main taxes that we have to pay: income tax, sales tax, and property tax. So all of you, if you've bought something before, you've paid sales tax before. Everybody who has a job has paid income tax before. Your parents who own a house have probably paid property tax before. And we'll talk about each one of these taxes as we go on here. So income tax, everybody who has a job has to pay income tax. However, some states do not have income tax. So you actually have to pay income tax twice. You pay it at the state level in Wisconsin and at the federal level for living in the United States. Some states do not have income tax. So for instance, if you live in Florida, they do not have a state income tax for Florida. So all workers in Florida have to pay is the federal income tax. Okay. What else gets taken out of your paycheck for income tax are these other taxes one is called the FICA tax, which is Federal Insurance Contribution Act. The 2 taxes that are included in FICA are Medicare and Social Security taxes. Medicare is used to pay for medical expenses, and Social Security, once you retire, you're able to get some money once you retire. So there's 4 different things that are taken out of your paycheck, and I'll go back real quick. So we've got federal income tax, we've got state income tax, then we've got Medicare and Social Security. Those are the 4 taxes that are taken out of everybody's paycheck if you are a worker in the United States and in states that have state tax, such as Wisconsin, Illinois, Minnesota. Most states do have an income tax. Some terminology or vocabulary words that you'll see associated with income tax. The first one is withholdings. Withholdings is basically any amount of money that you have withheld from your paycheck involuntarily. Okay, so federal tax, federal income tax, state income tax, you don't get a choice whether you want to pay it or not. You are paying it if you are a citizen of the United States and you work in the United States. Okay, so FICA taxes, Social Security, Medicare, they're withholdings, money that's withheld from you. Okay, but you can also have deductions, things that you choose to deduct from your paycheck. So some things like a 401k retirement plan or an insurance package, you can have those deducted right out of your paycheck voluntarily. You can choose whether or not you want to do that. We call those other deductions that you'll have to take out of your gross pay to figure out what your net pay is going to be. For instance, out of each one of my paychecks, I think I have $20 that gets taken out for insurance purposes. So if anything were to happen and I couldn't work, that would help to pay for the lost money that I wouldn't be able to make. But I choose to have that taken out. I don't have to. That's a deduction that I choose to take. Some more vocabulary words. The first one on the board here or on the screen is exemptions. So when we talk about some of the forms that you'll have to fill out with getting a job, you'll have to file for exemptions, which means that's less money that you have to pay for taxes. If you're exempt from these things, that's more money that you can keep for yourself. Okay, so the more exemptions you take, the less your withholdings will be. So if you have things like children to pay for, the government allows you to keep more money so that you can pay for the things that you need, like food and clothing, so on and so forth. So those are called exemptions. And then the last one is dependents. Most of you are probably dependents on you're dependent on your parents, which means that you are a dependent. If you live on your own, you don't depend on anyone else's income to support you, you're what we call an independent. Okay, so a dependent is somebody who depends on somebody else for financial support, for shelter, food, clothing, etc., etc. Okay, the government will give you or let you keep more of your money if you have dependents. So if they understand, hey, you've got kids, you need more money for yourself to pay for these things, you have less taxes taken out of your paycheck. Okay, the next type of tax we'll talk about is sales tax. Like I mentioned earlier, anybody who's bought something before has paid sales tax before. So when you go to McDonald's and you buy a $1 soda, it ends up costing you $1.07 because of sales tax. Sales tax is decided on at the local and state level. So each state has its own sales tax, and each county can have its own sales tax as well. So states like Montana do not have a sales tax at all. They do not have a state sales tax, but there are taxes at the local level. So it can kind of differ, you know, if you buy a soda from McDonald's in Waukesha versus in Kenosha, they're going to cost a little bit differently because the sales taxes are different. And then the last type of tax we'll talk about is property tax. So the local government will tax you on the things that you own, the properties that you own. So land, houses, sometimes cars. And then that money is used to pay for local things like schools, roads, local projects to fix things up. That's what that money is used for. So most of you have probably not paid property tax, and you won't until you own a house or some sort of property. But that's how the government kind of gets their revenue to pay for the things that they want to do. So I want to talk about this idea of progressive versus regressive taxes. Think of the word progress, means going forward. So a progressive tax gets larger with the more money that you make. So income tax is what we call a progressive tax. The more money you make, the more money you have to pay. So federal and state income tax are examples of progressive tax. Somebody who makes $10 a year versus somebody who makes $1 million a year, the person who makes $10 a year is going to pay way less in taxes than the person who earns $1 million or makes $1 million a year. And then regressive taxes are the exact opposite. They get smaller as you have more income. So sales tax is an example of a regressive tax, because if we take that example of somebody who makes $10 a year versus somebody who makes $1 million a year, they both have to pay the same sales tax no matter how much they make. But it's going to seem like more money for the person who makes less. So I'll give you an example. Somebody who makes $10 a year goes to McDonald's to buy a soda, and somebody who makes $1 million a year go to McDonald's to buy a soda. They both have to pay the 7 cents of sales tax, but who's going to feel that more? Who is that going to affect more? It's going to affect the person with less income. So a regressive tax is one that the sales tax is an example, because it stays the same for everybody no matter what. So the more money you make, the smaller it seems to you. Okay, in the next slide that we watch, the next video you watch, we'll do some examples of calculating tax numbers. So I'll show you guys how to do that. We'll calculate net pay, and we'll figure out gross pay versus net pay, and how to actually do that. It might be a review for some of you, but we will cover that in the next video. So we'll talk about taking the percentage, moving it to a decimal, multiplying it, but we'll cover that in the next video.